Díomh ach duine, lá hána chun Díomh, and yeah, I'm Tasri here, just making another video, a belated video on Halloween, Samhain, because my phone ran out of battery yesterday and I couldn't make one then. So I decided to make it today instead. This would be the first day of the new year in the Celtic calendar. Of course, they followed a lunar calendar rather than a solar one, and it wasn't the Julian calendar or the Gregorian calendar wasn't followed until Christianity came. But traditionally, this was the new year. We know from the Coligny calendar in Gaul, and which dates to 1st century AD, and also we know from a calendar in the Isle of Man that there was a 13-month lunar calendar, and the beginning of winter was the start of the year. Not only did the years begin in winter, but the days began at night, much like today. 12 a.m. the day begins today. In the past it was duskfall, so when the sun set, that's when the day began. And that's why Halloween was celebrated overnight, so over 2 days during the night. And it's also why in Christianity we have All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day, either side of that 31st October, 1st November. But it was an overnight festival. So Halloween is obviously very different today than how it was in the past. A lot of people say it was an American tradition, or it's some sort of it comes from America, but in reality it came from Ireland to America and back to Europe. And originally it was popular all over Europe. So some points about Halloween. A lot of the traditions that we have, in fact most of them really, that we celebrate today in Halloween, come from ancient times. Take for example the tradition of pumpkin carving. Now of course pumpkins come from America, but there is one example of a turnip from ancient Gaul, which is carved with a face in it, and hollowed out like a jack-o'-lantern. And this is basically the same thing. In Ireland they would have used turnips and sweet beets and other things rather than pumpkins. And these are lit inside. You put a face in it, scary face or whatever, in order to scare away these winter spirits, these evil spirits, which are like personifications of the winter. In the same way that giants and trolls and whatnot are personifications of, say, pernicious natural forces, let's say, which is why they're often made out of stone, or they turn to stone when the sun shines and things like that. And the tradition of troll stones and giant beds and things like that, it comes from that tradition. The winter spirits again were personifications of the darkness and the cold. The tradition of trick-or-treating comes from when children, in particular, would dress up as these spirits returned from the grave, the dead ancestors basically, in the form of evil spirits, goblins or whatever. And they would go door to door, asking for appeasement, I guess, offerings from the people. And the implication here is that there would be a trick for these people, that something bad would happen to them, that the spirits of winter and whatnot would take revenge on them if they weren't to be appeased and whatnot. But it was also the welcoming of the dead ancestors back, because in Ireland there was a tradition that in the burial mounds, such as this one here, the spirits of the dead ancestors would rise from the grave. In particular, the spirits of the Síche. These were sort of like Disir in the Nordic tradition. However, they are also, after Christianity came, the gods of the pagan gods also became sort of the Aeschi, or these Síche, the people of the mounds. That's what it is. And today they're called fairies. But these were pernicious spirits who would form the wild hunt. So this the Sluagh was the wild hunt, or the army of the fairies, I guess in English would be. And after Halloween, they would return from the burial mounds for a number of nights, and they would terrorize the people and whatnot. And the reason why people would lit bonfires would be to, or light jack-o'-lanterns would be to banish the darkness, basically. At the start of winter, you sort of try to banish the primordial darkness that returns. That's why people lit fires and things like that, and that's why we have fireworks today. A lot of people say that Guy Fawkes Night, when some Catholic revolutionary tried to overthrow the crown, was also where we get that from. And of course it's Guy Fawkes Night, which is shortly after Halloween, but they're not the same thing. And the traditions of bonfires and fireworks and whatnot come from before. Well, of course there was no gunpowder in ancient times, but just bonfires and whatnot, bone fires. This is where burnt sacrifices would be made, offerings. Usually of livestock, but there's also another point which needs to be made, and I'll get back to the thing with the children in a bit, and that's that between Samhain and Imbolc, so between the start of winter and the end of winter, there was a time of peace, or like, it's according to the Brehon laws, the Seanchas Mór, the people were supposed to live in peace during this time, and this predates Christianity. It's a pagan thing, and so during this time, so before Samhain, before the start of winter and the end of the harvest, all disputes needed to be settled. So usually before Samhain, duels would be fought, or a contest would be had, and on Samhain itself, many contests between families, sort of friendly contests, would be made, as well as more serious like games, things like that, to settle disputes between neighbours and families. That's why we do things like apple bobbing and pin the tail on a donkey and things like that, and like obstacle courses and whatnot. There would be contests to test people's physical, intellectual ability. They were just fun and games, basically. They were to settle disputes, you know. And of course, if any duels needed to be fought or people had a dispute needs to be settled, it had to be done so before Samhain, because after Samhain was meant to be a time of peace, and the dead bodies would be burned in bonfires. This was not to do anything to do with cremation. Actually, a bonfire will not cremate somebody. In order to have a fire hot enough to cremate bone, you need to build a significant hearth. And it was possible. In fact, in Neolithic times, they were building these hearths, and they were cremating bone. And these would have been substantial monuments. In fact, in Mesolithic times, it's even before agriculture, they were doing this. But that wasn't anything to do with Samhain. People weren't cremating people here, because a bonfire is simply just a ritual offering. It's not to do with cremation or burying the dead. There would still be charred remains left there, which would have to be buried. So it wasn't to do with cremation. Another part of these games about welcoming the ghosts and the monsters and the ghouls and the dead ancestors back to the house, they'd be given appeasement, which would come in the form of sweet treats and food, basically. In Ireland, the most common sweet, or sort of bread or cake which would be given would be barmbrack, or bording brack. So a little speckled loaf is what it translates as. And it's basically it's raisin bread with some sort of fruit in it or something. And I think they put whiskey in it, I'm not sure. I don't think they do, actually. But it's raisin bread, basically. And this would also be used for divination. There would be 4 different items in the bread. One would be a ring, and whoever took the slice with the ring would probably get married next year. Another would be a cloth. Whoever got the cloth, I think, would be poor. Then there were 2 other things I forget. I think of flour and something else. But anyway, this is basically an example of a self-fulfilling prophecy, in my opinion. If you get the ring and everyone's like, "Oh, you're going to get married," and then next year it's like, "Okay, I'm going to get married this year. I better marry a good husband or wife." And so it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, of course, and they end up getting married because, they wanted to sort of meet their fate, I guess. It's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the person who thinks they're going to be poor the person who thinks they're going to lose everything is more likely to lose everything, because when bad things happen, they'll be like, oh well, this is destiny, you know, it's better meet my fate. So it's to do with a self-fulfilling prophecy, in my opinion. Other things about Halloween. There are also many caves, particularly in the west of Ireland, where the Suar Sidhe were said to rise from. They ride out of the cave and they can be seen riding across the sky. Yeah, it's basically a liminal time between the world of the dead, or this other world where the gods live and magical beings, the world of the ancestral home for the ancestors, basically, where you go when you die, the underworld. So those two sort of planes, and then of course the physical realm, the realm of the living. That's it was a liminal point between these two times, because it was at the point between the annual cycle, year to year. Often some of the foods people would eat, for example, blood pudding, or that food where it's like, I think it's called Chester cake in English, I'm not sure, where it's like bits of old cake and bread like baked together, sort of like rotten food baked together, but it's quite nice. And things like drisheen and stuff. It mimics like the Feast of the Dead. That's one of the big part of it, like a Feast of the Dead. The dead are eating like dead food, basically, and it's healthy, but it's symbolic of the feast of like these zombies. Yeah, that's most of the traditions of Halloween. Of course, there would be feasting and games, and like in all celebrations. In fact, all of the festivals in Ireland had bonfires of some kind, because they're simply sacrifices to the gods would be burnt offerings. That's the only reason why the four high festivals of Ireland were also called the fire festivals, because they would make bonfires. And they did the same thing in the Germanic tradition, on Midsummer and the equinox and things like that. But rather strange that in the Celtic tradition, rather than the equinox and Midsummer and whatnot, and Midwinter being the most important festivals, the axes are inverted, and it's you know, the start of spring, the start of summer, the start of autumn, the start of winter, which are the main festivals: Imbolc, Bealtaine, Lunasa, and Samhain. Yeah, I'm making this video late because it's now November. Samhain is also the name for the month of November, Mina Hauna. And it's also attested in the Caligny calendar in Gaul. Samhain is the name for Samhain and the month of November, or Samonius, I think. So that's the thing. And of course, Halloween was also the end of the harvest. All of the crops needed to be harvested before this date, and put away in the barns. And they would make rings of fire, and they would drive the animals through the rings of fire. This is a way of like purifying them, to keep them free from the contamination of the winter spirits. Did it serve an actual health benefit, or was it magic or whatnot? I can't say, but it probably served some purpose, or they wouldn't have done it so often. They would drive them through rings of fire before they put them in for the winter. Yeah, and then there would be a ceremonial battle between the winter spirits and the people, which Varg talked about a lot, and Odilsarvin as well. He made some good videos on it. But it's sort of interesting hearing the Nordic perspective on this sort of thing, because yeah, the story from one culture is never really complete. You need to look at the whole bigger picture to understand it. Yeah, that's most of the traditions of Halloween, which I wanted to talk about yesterday.